tell us, like, how did it all start? What did you do to cause this mayhem? Because I know it's all your fault.
I had the audacity to talk about Medicaid from my ivory tower, my Scrooge McDuck safe of gold doubloons. I dared to speak out about the program for the poor. Yeah, I was talking about Medicaid. There's been a bunch of debates. I think I've spoken out a lot on Twitter about it. I've been in some debates with the California Association of Neurological Surgeons, of which I'm a board member. There's a ongoing discussion with other board members about if we should take a stance on the Medicaid changes in the big, beautiful bill. And I tended to find that the people who take the fewest Medicaid patients tend to have one of the loudest voices. And here I am, again, I'm about 80% Medicaid. And so I think that was the tweet that actually spawned somebody else to quote tweet me and look up my salary and copy paste the picture of my salary because I'm a state employee from California. And so they put my salary online and said, I'm not allowed to talk about Medicaid because I make too much money before I should. I think I was told to shut up and enjoy my enormous salary.
Shut up and dribble.
Yeah,
so
shut up.
What is it about, I'm assuming the guy's younger, what is it about that generation that doesn't, like, what is that? In my generation, like, it was like you said what was on your mind. If you were disrespectful, then something happened to you that I didn't particularly enjoy. But I learned a lot of lessons. I had a big mouth. That doesn't happen now, obviously, for probably good reason. Maybe not. I don't know. I haven't decided yet. But the point being, we have to have open discussions. What is it about that generation that's like, no? Because he wasn't the only one. There were several throughout the weekend that were like, hey, you're rich, which $650,000 or whatever it is, that's not rich. Just FYI. And then what is it about the generation that's like, hey, you shut up. You don't have the right to speak. Like, what is that? I didn't understand that.
Well, objectively, yes, objectively, that's a lot of money. I mean, compared to median income in the U.S., it's certainly a lot of money.
Yeah, but he used the words wealthy. And I was like, well, this isn't wealthy.
Well, again, it's a relative term, right? I mean, and this is where I think it was such an important discussion to have. I mean, obviously, I wish it had happened in not pointing fingers way or just a way that it was an attempt to like tear down folks. I mean, I don't know. I don't have the right words to describe it. I wish the discussion had gone differently, but I think it is an important underlying topic to discuss. And that is, there is a lot of dissension among the ranks of physicians on many things. And there is a great grievance on the part of many a primary care family practice physician that feel like they are working to the bone, they're taking on liability, and they're getting paid, relatively speaking, peanuts. And again, I think it's an important thing that it came out because it comes from that place. It comes from a place of like, it's not just the United Health CEO that's making too much money. It's not just them that are the problem. It's you who are the problem because the system is empowering you. So there's like the system is giving you all this stuff and it's giving me nothing. And I think I'm doing something that's very important, which they're doing important stuff. So I think, I mean, I didn't like the tone of it. I didn't like the shut up and, again, it's a colleague. You're talking to a fellow colleague and saying that shut up and don't say anything. So I did not like that. And I think, honestly, that is something that is felt among not just the younger generation, but a large group of, I think, employed physicians that come from a certain ideology that follow a certain ideology. And all of them feel that. I think the young physician who said what he said was just kind of intemperate enough to actually say so online. But it's an important discussion to have, so I'm interested to hear all the different thoughts.
I'd love to hear what your thoughts were.
Yeah, I think that I don't think this is just pure cancel culture. This is just kind of silencing, harassment tactic of utilizing cancel culture. And you're canceling someone. He was trying to cancel Anthony. And Anish and I have experienced cancel culture back in COVID pandemic on X. And it came from both sides, the right, the left. I mean, it's a tactic that's used online. I don't think it's exclusively used by one generation or not, but it certainly does not lead to productive policy discussions on X. And if you really also look at what I found distasteful about the whole situation is that this is basically the classic tactic that is used to shame and silence physicians throughout and always in corporate medicine and especially amongst health policy experts, right? Anish, I mean, we saw this especially during the No Surprises Act debates online where we had certain policy experts who would take physicians down and say, oh, well, you want to price out of network services that you aren't contracted with at 800% Medicare. You are a lunatic for wanting 800% of Medicare. Never mind that Medicare is a safety net program rate, right? It is for the socially vulnerable. That was bare bones bottom rate. It was never the market rate. And so you would have these health policy experts go, tell me what you think you should get paid for a laminectomy or a spinal cord decompression. And my response back to them is like, do you think you, as someone who has never been in the operating room, never gone through intern year, where you don't even know how stressful to make sure you get your vitals collected correctly, right? Like the most thing we learn in medical school is you remember sweating bullets over trying to remember to do everything right so that you don't mess up your patient's life, right? And now you're doing advanced neurosurgery where you're working millimeters from the spinal cord, and you're telling me that you think you know how to price that appropriately or put a rate on that. I can't tell you I know exactly, but all I know is that Medicare and Medicaid is not the correct market rate, and that we need a law that basically allows market forces to set that rate. And you can ask anyone, like if your loved one was about to have a cardiac arrest and your interventional cardiologist was there and ready to stent that patient, came in at 2 a.m. and saved your loved one's life, you tell me in that moment, what would you price that at? And that's not like a comfortable conversation to have. And it's not something that, in the heat of the moment in the ER, we're not going to have that discussion. We're not going to have that pricing discussion. But the other side, when they want to shackle physicians and tell us to just shut up and work and tell us that, you know what, you already get overpaid. Like you're making $500,000 a year or whatnot, not factoring in our medical school debt or any of the stresses of the job or just what we put ourselves through to make sure that our patients get everything they need. I think that this is just a tactic again. And that's what I found so distasteful because I've seen it over and over, right? Danielle Ofri, I think during COVID, published that article. It was something about burnout. I think the hospitals and doctors and how these tactics are used against physicians to income shame. And so whenever I see that, it's just a classic thing I see, and it's just never conducive to good policy discussions.
Dr. Dixit, what do you think?
So I took a little bit of that personally when he did that. And my response was a little less muted than some of your responses. I grew up in New York City, and growing up as a conservative person in New York City, you tend to see a lot of that sort of flavor of argument. And the flavor of argument is basically, number one, your position is morally repugnant. Number two, you're a bad person. Number three, you shouldn't have a right to speak. And after dealing with that for X amount of time, you quickly figure out who you can have a constructive conversation with and who you just need to just maybe not troll, but just kind of effectively shut down. I will point out a couple of things. There were two things I noticed. There was a subtle undertone of being a very academic, and just looking at the structure or the lack of structure of a complete dearth of an argument. I'm like, I don't think he's actually got a position other than I'm a better person than you are and I'm more moral than you are. And number two, I never saw a single substantive point buttressing his argument other than you're a bad person, I'm a good person, I care more about the patients, and yay. And we've all met people like that who have very strong opinions, but they have a substantive basis to their position. I don't think this person had a substantive basis. I think it's literally the standard blame and shame sort of strategy. I'm assuming the culture inside that organization, that academic center, is very much like a Maoist struggle session if you fall on the wrong side of a particular argument. And I think that's the tactic he's used to using, and that's what he was trying to use against Anthony. What I was heartened by is how so many different people outside of our circle, so many physicians who are maybe we're connected to or maybe not directly connected to, had a visceral reaction to this and came out and said, yeah, this is wrong. The other thing that I absolutely enjoyed is how many people said, brother, you're underpaid for what you do. And I'm like, thank you, because you do good work. And if your end goal was to chase money, you could be chasing money. And probably my favorite thing, when your spouse chimed in, I'm like, every medical student, I would show that little tweet to every medical student and say, when you're going through your rotations or you're going through your postgraduate education, What should you shoot for? Should you shoot for the professorship? Should you shoot for the papers? Should you shoot for the money? I'm like, no. Show them the tweet of what Anthony's wife wrote about him and say, that's what you shoot for. So
Hey.
there was a lot of mudslinging. There was a lot of nonsense. And I tried to I maybe broke my professional decorum a little bit with that guy to troll him. But that's what I thought he deserved. That's what I'm used to doing. But aside from all that, I felt really heartened to see how many people came and we got you back. So, Anthony, we got you back.
How many people did you have reach out to you? Like, you had a bunch of people.
Yeah, I mean, privately, 20, 25 people at least have reached out to me. It has been a huge outpouring. And honestly, if you're talking about income shaming, I think Sanat made a good point. It's probably shaming me for making too little money. But I didn't really get that offended when I first saw that tweet. I thought, okay, maybe that's just a unnecessary ad hominem attack, but sure, go ahead, whatever. I did respond to it, but then the amount of people that came out in support publicly, privately, it was pretty amazing. And of course, my wife's tweet was the best.
That was gold.
That was great. So let me ask a question here, because I sort of alluded to this point the last podcast that I was on is we're fairly like-minded, but there are a lot of us who see things very differently. I also alluded to the fact that sometimes our biggest adversaries are our own colleagues. My question to all of you here is, how do you have a good faith discussion with someone who isn't necessarily there to have a good faith discussion like that person was, but is pretty much trying to do the blame and shame struggle session? And I'll go ahead and say this. I don't know the person, but just seeing the nature and tone of his rhetoric, I said to my wife, this is the person that pretty much signs the document that sends you the firing squad. That's kind of the vibe that I got from this person. I mean, again, I don't know them, but it just seemed really aggressive and just kind of like, you're beneath me and you're not worthy of me.
You know,
What I want to know, Anthony, did you get her flowers to get her to do that tweet, or did you promise her like a nicer car? Like, that's what I want to know.
Yeah, I watched the kids for 4 hours while she trained for her marathon. That's my gift to my wife.
See, I knew it. I knew there was something. It's got to be some quid pro quo.
She's gold.
I think Sanat alluded to this earlier about, and I tweeted something to this effect, because you're trying to understand where it's coming from. And only because I've been trying to argue against the establishment now for I think 10 years now. You come at this because, again, I was part of the establishment. I did believe a bunch of different things that I was told in terms of Medicaid. Of course, Medicaid is a safety net. Oh my God, what are you talking about cutting the safety net? Of course, that's going to be bad, right? Like, are you crazy? So I come from that place because, and then you get into actually trying to take care of patients, right? So I came from this theoretical place of Medicare is awesome, Medicaid is awesome, and everything about these safety nets and these government programs are fantastic. And then you actually open up a practice and you try to practice, and then suddenly you're, obviously ad nauseum, you could go into like what the problems have been. And so that's been my path from what I thought was morally good and right to this, kind of contrarian path where I'm like, wait a sec, guys. Can we just think about this? Because I'm here, I'm on the ground, I'm trying to take care of folks in this system, and here are the things that don't seem to be working in this program. And you quickly realize, as Sanat did, as Anthony I'm sure has at this point, that's where these kind of responses come from, is that they are not that interested in the actual policy of it. They are interested in this being a moral argument, right? And so to the Marxist, it's not a matter of being right or wrong. It's that you are living in sin. So if you say something against their ideology, it's a reflexive emotional reaction. It is like breaking one of the 10 commandments. And so that's the place they're arguing from. And yeah, it's a great question. How do you try to make the thing? And I don't think you can really make the argument with them. What you have to do is, in discussing with them, right, you're making the argument to the people that are watching. You cannot convince those folks at all. So it's really important not to get dragged down into the mud, because it's the other people that are watching to be like, okay, these two guys are going at these two guys, two gals or whatever are going at it. Who is making the better argument, right? If it becomes a mudslinging competition, and it's just ad hominems going back and forth, then yeah, I think everyone looks bad. Meaning physicians look bad. Remember, physicians are the minority. It's actually the wider society that are going to make decisions and vote, whatnot, to decide what happens to physicians in the system that gets, and what type of system that gets set up. So I think that's the important thing to keep in mind. You cannot have a good faith discussion with these folks who are having this moral disagreement with you. But
do you think, though, that the conversations are worth having? Like, my stance would be, I don't really care if they want to have it or not. Like, I put stuff out there, I have a job. I like to, if I could play all day on X, I really would. I really enjoy it. But like, I think the conversations are worth having. And I think you're completely correct.
Yeah.
In that it is for the audience. It really isn't the other person. And the ad hominem attacks, I mean, sometimes they come. I'm happy to dish them out. I don't care. I'm just not going to do.
I like how you did it. I like how you did it. You
right? I'll just push back. I mean, Sanat's from New York. I'm from Rotterdam. It's just as bad. International city, very small. Way too many people. About 2 million people living in the biggest seaport in the world. I'll just push back. And English is my second language, so I feel like I have an advantage. I'll annihilate you. I had to learn this language.
I like the way you did it. There were some zingers, but man, there was a ton of data there that kind of, made the point, and there was really no good response to that. So, but it is important. I think it is important. Maybe that's the next thing to discuss. So it is important to somewhat steelman some of that discussion, meaning, I don't think there is a discussion to be had here about physician incomes and how is it that physician incomes come to be what they are, right? And there is a good discussion to be had about the way we have payment set up, right? The prospective payment system that says here's a CPT code and I'm going to get payment, right? Whether it be Medicaid, Medicare, or commercial insurers, right? And that system, right, which is this third-party system that basically arguably allows for a fair amount of overuse. And nobody has really, it's hard to quantify that degree of overuse. And I'd be super interested. I mean, you guys are all spine surgeons, right? And what are your thoughts on physician income, spine neurosurgery, spine neuro, spine ortho income? And how do we deal as a physician community with this idea of, is there overuse because of the way the system is set up? And then the next question is, well, how does one kind of address that in any way?
Yeah, I think that if you wanted to keep doctors fighting amongst themselves, the best thing you could do is set up the prospective payment system the way it's set up, right? Where you cannot give anybody a raise without somebody else getting a haircut because it's a fixed pie. And so it's a wonderful job they did to keep us fighting amongst ourselves. And I think there were some legitimate discussions that arose this weekend about the fact that there is this infighting amongst physicians and how can we fix it? And my answer is that it's ridiculous that it's a fixed pie, that you have this, so physicians have to take a haircut for somebody else to get a raise. But B, why is primary care even in the prospective payment system? That's the bigger question, is why do we include something that's considered routine maintenance in a prospective payment system that should be used for insurable events? And that's the real issue, because when you look at the way that the RUC and CPT operate, is all the codes that are available to primary care physicians are available to all of us, right? We can all build E&M codes. We can all build the complexity of care codes. We can build advanced care planning. So if they want to boost the rates of those codes, we can use those codes. The primary care doctors can't use the anterior cervical discectomy infusion codes, right? They're not, so those are isolated to us. So it's just ridiculous that there's even this idea that we have to have these E&M codes and all this in a prospective payment system when these are not insurable events. These are maintenance things. This should be completely outside of the prospective payment system. I think we should get rid of the central planning altogether, but primary care physicians should just say, hey, we're not participating in this charade anymore. We're all going to go in direct primary care, cash pay, et cetera. Then you get rid of that big part, because I do want our primary care colleagues to get paid more, and I want to have them a better quality of life and quality of work. The fact that they sit there doing prior auths and paperwork all day, they're forced by these large health systems to see 50 patients a day. It's just ridiculous what they have to go through. So I want them to make more. I absolutely respect our primary care colleagues, and I think that they should do what they can to get out of the prospective payment system, take control of their practices, take control of their lives, and make a ton of money for doing the important work that they do.
So 2 questions. Number 1, do you think the person that was levying these arguments against you has any clue about how he is paid?
No comment. I have no idea.
The second thing is, how many hours do you think that person works a month?
Way more than any of us, probably, I'm sure.
Probably not.
Yeah.
Probably not. And that's not a dig against the primary care folks. I mean, I see what the hospitals go through and the internists go through, but I do understand that mindset. That mindset is, I'm super productive for what I do. I get a lot done. And then you look at it, just from my vantage point, I remember an interventional neuroradiologist at Vanderbilt. And he was like, I'm just swamped. I says, why are you swamped? I had to do 3 cases today. He says, I had to do 3 angiograms. I'm like, okay, yeah, that's like half a morning. And I told him what my day was like and how many patients I saw and how many hospitals I cover is like, how do you do that? It's just, what do you mean, how do I do that? It's just, you just learn how to do it. It's all relative. That's the problem with the RVU-based system is somebody else got to define where the relative piece was. But I think it has to be said that a lot of times when you start talking about the policy piece and you talk about how the sausage is made, people get very uncomfortable because they're not knowledgeable and they defer to something else. Dutch, what you did with talking about UCLA, that was a beautiful takedown. I raised the point in a different way because there was the argument like Medicaid needs to thrive. I'm just like, having more people on Medicaid is not a good thing. And there's a number of reasons for that philosophically. But here's the other reason why is the MCOs that are managing Medicaid patients are making more and more money for managing fewer Medicaid patients. And that's what happens if you give these people more power, more leverage, more sway. The money's going to be going to this giant sink that's going to go into their pockets. You really don't understand what it is that you're supporting. I don't know what you do with that. I really don't know what you do with that, because if you have this sense of intrinsic moral righteousness that I'm doing God's work and you're not, it becomes an article of faith and not an article of sort of logic.
Yeah. I think just to go back on, this discussion of like how it wasn't really about proving this gentleman wrong, this one person, but it was actually the most important thing I think came out of this discussion is other observers, right? And especially for us, I think the most important audience for us is our future generation of physicians. So we're talking about the pre-medical students, the medical students, the residents, the fellows, the young physicians who are just out of training. And I'll tell you why, because I think Anish alluded to this. I remember being a medical student who voted for Barack Obama, who I remember on Facebook, there was an orthopedic surgery resident who was talking about how universal healthcare doesn't work. And I went berserk on this guy. And I remember kind of the moral righteousness and inner rage that just kind of popped out from me because I actually had parents that were uninsured. I grew up without healthcare coverage in my family. So there is a level of kind of, you grow up with this, you experience poverty, and sometimes maybe it wasn't your own family's fault, or maybe it was the system's fault, you ascribe blame. And I think I understand where that kind of moral indignation comes from, but does it make it right? Or does it make it, so does that actually translate to good policy? Or does it actually translate to something that actually helps everyone? It doesn't, because that moral righteousness of feeling like, well, you've got to fix this and you got to give healthcare to everyone, that's Marxist, and it doesn't. It's transfer of wealth, and it's this feeling of laying claim to, I think, other people's wealth, right? Or resources. And I think I understand where it comes from, but I think that when you look at the AMA, right, and I'm very involved in the AMA, and why you see the AMA getting these crazy headlines, and Anthony's seen this firsthand when we go to AMA annual meeting, is that all the good policy about breaking up insurance companies or increasing free market, increasing competition in healthcare, breaking up the health systems, all the good policy, guess what? It gets passed, and it gets passed before the actual House of Delegates. People don't understand how it works. People think the AMA, all they want to do is talk about all these social justice issues and nationalizing healthcare and making it single payer. It's not true. All the good policy just gets passed. And then on the day of the House, what is spent, 2.5 days spent, is all the reasonable delegates in the AMA are trying to fight off a huge contingency of the medical students and the residents who have single-handedly come up, and they're very organized. And it's just like what you see with all these kind of left organized groups, is that they're very organized. They have resolution after resolution, and they force every year at the annual meeting a vote on whether the AMA House of Delegates would support a single-payer system in America. And what should concern all of us who know what that will bring one day, and what type of inefficiencies and really injustices in care if we go to a single payer healthcare. We're concerned about that. You should be concerned because a lot of employed physicians wouldn't care less today if we move to a single payer system. They don't understand the economics behind it. Just like this gentleman who tweeted to Anthony about did the income shaming, he doesn't understand the economics, how physicians are getting paid. He doesn't understand the reimbursements. And most of the employed physicians, who are now 73% or so of this country, don't understand, don't care. And if you told them that, hey, like there's people who don't have coverage, they'll be like, okay, sign me up. I want everyone to have coverage so they can access the health system, right? And they don't understand that. And what you're seeing every year is you have what's the group for internal medicine? It's American College of Physicians has taken a vote, and their official policy stance is they support a single payer healthcare system in America. And so once you see every major organization in medicine fall in line and say, we support a single payer healthcare system, it's over. And that's what actually impacts the policymakers, what gets driven in Washington, D.C., and what we live on a day-to-day basis. And so I think the most important, and guess what? At the AMA, what me and some of the more reasonable delegates actually are, what we try to do is we actually go and sit down with medical students one-on-one. And we actually invite them to go grab drinks with their group of friends. And we say, hey, do you want to learn about private practice? Do you want to learn that there's another model besides, just being employed? We'll share with you like what that's like, and there's another way. And we sit in and we get to know them personally. We engage them, and they see that maybe I'm not like a capitalist pig, and I actually run my private practice because I want to actually help my patients in the best and most efficient way possible. And I explain the economics behind it. I explain to them like, hey, do you know that after residency, after fellowship, you're going to be in X amount of debt? This is what a mortgage looks like. Some people are not talking to them about also their own personal finances and how they're going to be chained in an employed system. And so when I see that, I actually see medical students actually turn and they're like, oh my gosh, they get woken up, they get red pilled, I guess. And then all of a sudden they are asking the right questions and actually have had them help us, Anthony. I think you've seen that pass resolutions that make sense and are promoting more competition in healthcare instead of single payer. So that's my take on that.
So interestingly, oh no, please, I want you to go, but I'm just going to mention one thing is, interestingly, two of you were converts. So we're going to have more discussions about this because you literally used logic and thought and said, hey, I'm going to be introspective and I'm going to consider things and I'm going to take what I've learned and I'm open to changing my mind. I mean, I think all of us at our ages have now gone up and down several flights of stairs and figured out what I thought when I was 20, I didn't think when I was 25. What I thought at 25, I didn't think at 30. And I'm almost 50. So I think I've kind of gone full circle. And so, yeah, Dr. Coca, please, I want to hear what you have to say.
I mean, Dan's points were excellent. We have to make, I think the important thing also is not only speaking to the medical students, which is very important to do. I mean, that younger generation, which doesn't have a good handle on this and just is living in an abstract reality, much like the economists are, much like, journalists that cover healthcare. I mean, they're just completely unmoored from reality, right? And so, yes, we need to chat with them. But we also have to do, I think, a better job of showing empathy for folks that need the safety net, right? And I think sometimes things get lost in terms of like, the relative physician incomes and the ridiculousness of going after Anthony, who's a academic spine surgeon working at a safety net hospital, who's, frequently probably X percentage of the time taking care of patients that are uninsured, all that. I mean, yes, that's an insane thing to go after, but that's kind of like low-hanging fruit, right? I think that, but the kind of the harder thing is to make the argument for why this type of collectivist Marxist ideology that has creeped into medicine, why it's bad for patients that do need the safety net, right? And I think a lot of times it's very hard to do that. But I think the people that are most able to do that are folks who are sitting right here, right? Who can explain and articulate, and Anthony does this all the time, I try to do it, is explain and articulate that moving to these systems will actually make people poorer, will impoverish them, will reduce their access, right? The post that Nath made about the large MCOs, the companies that manage these Medicaid systems, it was great, right? It really highlighted the fact that you want to expand Medicaid, you're expanding the amount of money that's going to these systems, and they're going to, these rent seekers are going to take things out. Showing them the problems with Medicare for All in Canada, or the problems with Medicare with the socialized healthcare system we have in the UK. And then lastly, I think the really, really hard part is how do you make a case to both Republican and Democrat politicians that want a solution. And the problem with a solution is that they want some plan. Here is the plan to deliver healthcare to grandma and the 1-month-old, to the person making $30,000 a year, to the person making $1 million a year. We want a plan to cover everyone and have access. And that's the struggle, because you'll frequently hear, we'll start talking about markets. And then the moment you start talking about markets, there's a certain group of people, their eyes just glaze over, right? And they're like, great, libertarian approach to healthcare. Like, this isn't going to work. You're just going to let people die on the street, right? This idea that, like, you keep hammering home this idea that, like, you don't need a shoe insurance program and everyone has shoes. And if you did have a shoe insurance program, everything would be much worse. You'd have like 2 shoes available, and they would cost $1 bajillion, and you would need a loan to get those shoes, and people would be going bankrupt because they can't buy shoes. Anyway, and so I've really found the one of the most effective folks, incredibly effective, though he's still lost, which shows you how hard this is, right? One of the most effective communicators about the market was, I think, Milton Friedman, right? He would have this smile on his face the whole time he was talking. Nobody could jostle him. Nobody could upset him. And he would just rip apart these folks. And guess what? Despite the fact he did this, despite the fact he had video after video, he's still lost. I think what we have on our side is the fact that we have tried your way for a long time, right? We did the Affordable Care Act. We expanded Medicaid. And what happened? Healthcare got more expensive. Insurance premiums for the average family, insurance premiums are north of $20,000 a year, right? Deductibles have exploded. Everyone is feeling the pinch of it in today's world. And that's after the ACA was expanded. So I think we have to constantly hit these topics and move it towards why this approach that they are suggesting and putting forth, it will impoverish patients more and not be the solution.
Well, this is why they want to censor us, right? This is why they want to say you can't have a voice, because they realize our ideas are good. I'm a convert, I think, like you, Dan, that did not believe in markets and niche. It was largely your podcast that kind of changed my mind. And I think that's the point, is that these ideas we have are actually, they make sense. And the more you look into it, the more you really dig into the nuance behind the economics. You read people like Friedman or Sol or Hayek. These are all things that changed me and made me realize, like, hey, these are actually better ideas than everything I grew up thinking. And so that I think we just have to keep having these discussions. That's why I fight back on X, even though I know I'm not going to convince that one person. Maybe somebody else is reading it and isn't commenting, says, "Oh, that actually makes sense," and then that's one more convert.
All right,
So I'm gonna.
Oh, go ahead. You finish.
I want to
this
add
up.
just
We got another topic.
one more point here. I'll ask the question. I'll make a comment. What's the difference between empathy and virtue?
If your setup worked, that would be amazing.
Because these people think they're being. I know. Yeah. You guys can hear me at all now? No,
Yeah, we can hear you.
You're good.
I got to get a microphone.
You need Starlight.
Empathy and virtue signal. These people think they're being empathetic, but they're not being empathetic. The difference between empathy and virtue signaling is empathy is when you're actually focused on other people and their well-being, and virtue signal is saying, look what a good person that I am. And that was the undertone of a lot of this conversation. That's where it began. That's where it ended. The other way, you may not agree, the other way to sort of get some points is maybe not discredit them in the sense of dogpiling them, because for a while I was like scared, okay, this guy's really going to be, like, people were really just like castigating him, but finding novel, humorous ways to just kind of say, I can't take you seriously, because after a certain point in time, I'm like, there was no good faith over there. He wasn't operating in any semblance of good faith. And at that point, I just said, okay, I don't care. I'm going to get a laugh out of this. Maybe that's not the most professional thing in the world to do, but sometimes the last thing these people want us to be laughed at. Nobody wants to be laughed at. Nobody should be poking fun or trying to make somebody look silly and ridiculous, but he pretty much set the table for some of that stuff. That is another way to earn your stripes and make some points. I'm not saying that's the best way. I think the way Dutch did it, the way the Anish did it, Anthony, you give these people way too much leeway. I think you take the good faith to extremes when they have no intention of reciprocating. But I think that speaks to what kind of person you are. And I think that's why you got such a full-throated defense, is that so many people know who you are and where you're coming from. And it's just like, yeah, we took it a little bit personally. And, I think that.
All right. So speaking of taking things personally, right? We spent about 45 minutes talking about our fun weekend. But I do think, of course, like you, lots of lessons. There was a tweet that came out before that we all got excited about. I want to read it to you. It is from one of my favorite congressmen who is on the GOP doctors committee. I've seen him. I've met him. And he said, it's so troublesome to see so many young doctors complaining about how hard the job is. Your job is about taking care of patients. It's called dedication. It's called devotion. If you wanted an easy life, you should have chosen something else. I gotta tell you, for someone like me who just really likes to just M&M people, I really do. Maybe it's wrong, I know, but I really do enjoy it. I thought, dear God, did you just give me the freest layup of all time? I mean, I like Dr. Murphy. As a person, I like him, right? And I think legitimately he's trying hard. But then I thought, oh God, you just ruined all of my work that I've been trying to do to get people to like you. So I would love your takes on, is this the way you want to talk to the physician population? Was this a good take, a bad take? I mean, if someone wants to steel man his take, I'd love to hear it.
So I think that I would have loved to ask a Senator Congressman what the context of that X post was. He
Yeah.
must have seen something. It was probably something from more of a left-leaning physician, saying something about work hours, maybe a resident complaining about work hours, about how they had to take an extra night shift, something ridiculous that kind of got him riled up, and he hit the post button and didn't think, oh, this is going to be read by greater physician population, right? That's what I think happened. I think his post, to me, is just another offshoot of, or kind of downstream effect of what you're noticing with 73% of the physician population being employed. I think that you have to look at deeper systemic issues on where is it that you're getting this impression that young physicians are not pulling their weight and they don't want to work long hours. And if you really look at our young physicians being all employed, it's a different way of working as a physician than all the generations of physicians before in American healthcare, right? In American healthcare, it started off as your family doctor making home calls. Everyone had a shingle on, whether you liked it or not, and whether you had any business knowledge or at all. When you graduated medical school, you were a small business owner. That's how it worked in America. And if you were a terrible business owner, well, you had your solo practice and you probably just didn't make as much money as someone who understood maybe business a little bit better and you had to outsource and whatnot. And so now you've taken that and it's all gone to the corporate medicine under the guise of physicians are bad at business. So we're going to take that from them. We're going to run the system for you. And what ends up happening is when physicians are no longer a profession, right? You're not a profession really. You're an employee. You don't own your own reputation, right? You're behind this hospital system logo that's feeding you patients. And I wrote a X post thread about this, about how this whole migration into employed physician, this group of being employed physicians, will actually exacerbate our physician shortage, because what you have is all these physicians are getting fed patients now by the system. Really your RVU contract, you have a bare minimum you've got to hit, and then you're going to hit bonuses after that. So you're watching your RVUs. And look, at the end of the day, if you meet what corporate medicine says, this is what you need to do, your output that you need to produce to get your take home, you may not be as motivated to be like, oh my God, I've got to make sure that my referring sources are happy, because that's how it used to be, right? If you didn't keep your referrers happy and the physicians who sent you patients trusted you and said, wow, Dan Choi, he's amazing. Like anytime I call him about anything, he's there. And the business advice that I got, or not even business advice, it was practice building advice I got from private practice was, look, if you want to build a powerful practice, or you want to build a good practice, long-lasting, powerful practice, then you need to have three qualities. Sorry, powerful is the wrong word. I keep using that. But it's really just a practice that's long-lasting and a good practice in your community. You need to be three things, the three A's. It's able, affable, and available, right? Affable and available. You're nice. When people call you, you say, look, I'll take care of whatever you need. And then you're available, whether it's 12 a.m., 3 in the morning. If the ER doctor calls you because they need your help, or the internal medicine doctor, the PCP calls you because they need your help, you want to build your reputation and your name lies on that, and you want to be able, meaning that when you do that cervical fusion, you want to do it right. You want to make sure the patient gets well and goes out in the community and says great things about you and back to the referring physician. And that generates this self-motivated cycle of physicians who just want to work all the time. Like if you think about physicians, the last generation of physicians, what I remember about my friends in medical school whose parents were physicians, they all sounded like they were workaholics. Now, okay, our generation's all about work-life balance, but I remember these guys were working until their 70s, and my friends would complain to me, yeah, my dad was like never home. He was always at the hospital. He was always working. And that's not a good thing per se, but I can tell you, I don't think like we felt the physician shortage as much when all these physicians were so motivated to protect their reputations and their practices. And we flipped to a completely different system that does not incentivize physicians to be as productive. And so that's my concern. And I think that's kind of where the basis of a post like that from the congressman came from.
Dr. Dixit?
Well, hopefully you guys can hear me.
Yes.
So listen, I think this next generation of physicians, when they hit 50, 55, they're going to have their version of that tweet. When we were coming up, it's like, these residents don't know how good they have it. Every third night call, this is crazy. This is like vacation. We had every other night call, and we hated missing call because we missed that sort of pablum and that sort of nonsense. We all internalize a little bit of that. I think part of it is him trying to say, look, we get it. It's a hard job, but sometimes you just have to recognize and say, it's a hard job and do the job anyway. And I think that was his general point. The way he said it, it came off as somewhat judgmental. And even I was like, yeah, not the best take.
Well, but look, I needed someone to support him because I don't think he was being a dick. I think he just said it wrong. So I wrote a not very nice thing, and then I was like, oh, I shouldn't have wrote that. I was like, he probably didn't mean it, but what?
He had a follow-up, and he elaborated and expanded on what his general point was.
I didn't like his follow-up, did you?
Yeah, that was a little bit better. I thought it was a little bit better.
All right, very well. Dr. Coca.
Why do we think, look, we've gone through just in our little medical training lifetimes, right? We've gone from ACGME, we've introduced ACGME, shift requirements, right? 80-hour work weeks and not being on call for more than 30 hours. We've brought in the era of handoffs, right? Where people are constantly handing off. We've really brought in the era of shift work. I mean, shift work was not that common. And now there's so many jobs that you would never, ever have thought would be shift workers, right? It would be shift work. And now it is. So we've really transitioned to a period of time and the practice of, in a short period of time, we've transitioned medicine from something that was a calling to something that is a shift work job. And that was driven by, in large part, this demand for greater work-life balance. And there's a real good discussion to have about why that happened. And and I think that has a lot to do with who we're selecting to become physicians, the demographic shift that happened. But more over and over again, I think what we're seeing is that we are trying to make medicine palatable to physicians. And I think that's a recent thing. That's something recent in the last 20, 30 years. This is beyond the whole, when I went to school, I walked in snow barefoot, blah, blah, blah. I think we really have a huge shift in the last 20, 30 years where we've gone from this mindset that the physician needs to be happy. What is going on with the physician? And the crazy thing is, for all the discussion about moral injury and burnout and stuff now, right? Dan alluded to this. The physicians of a prior generation who were like the family practice guy who was on a corner street on call, right? Who covered him? What was his shift work? That guy was on all the time, right?
Yep. And
people would have his number. They would stop over at his house. Where's the work-life balance? Where's that line? If he's at the grocery store, people are stopping him, be like, oh, can you? So I think there's a lot to be said for Dr. Murphy's post, which kind of harkens to this idea that, should medicine be a calling or should it be like a punch in, punch out job? And I think for many physicians, maybe most physicians now, right, the idea is that medicine should be a punch in, punch out job. I think this is not within this little group of 4 physicians we have here, but 3 of them are spine surgeons. You guys have a very different mentality, I think, than the vast majority of physicians that are out there. So I don't think he's wrong. I think there's something to be said. I think it can be taken to be like, oh, everyone is lazy now and blah, blah, blah. But no, we really, as a physician community, and I think, again, it goes back to that earlier conversation I'm having. Like a lot of this stuff that we're talking about and about physicians, whether we're talking about income and what's the right income and we're underpaid because of this and blah, blah, blah. Again, you know what the patient's biggest problem is right now? They can't get a phone call back the same day from their physician. Why is that?
Because there's no RVU. No, I'm saying that's what. So we've stopped rewarding the 3 A's that Dan mentioned, and we started rewarding the RVU. And that's what happens when you're employed. People at some point decided that the 3 A's were not the commodity we wanted to promote in healthcare. We wanted to promote RVU generation, clicking checkboxes. And when people talk about work-life balance now, they want to be out of the hospital because the life in the hospital is not that enjoyable for a lot of people, right? Dan, if you're sitting there being the 3 A's, like you mentioned, there's some joy to that. I really like when primary care doctors call me up and I get to have a discussion about a difficult patient that they're dealing with and I get to actually help them out. I don't like answering code inquiries. And we spend, I think, a lot more time doing the second than we do the first. And so what our residents are doing, what they see as life in the hospital is ordering a Tylenol because the nurse can't put it in themselves, or answering the code inquiries, or answering the emails. Our residents, they get paged for their 24-hour shift. Our residents get paged on average every 90 seconds for a 24-hour shift. And 99% of those pages probably don't have any critical thinking associated with them. They're not being doctors. They're sitting there clicking boxes on the EHR to fill out these check boxes, answer things that take no critical skill. They don't take those 3 A's, and they're just to make this large bureaucratic system run. That's not enjoyable. And so I could see why people will say, I want less work, more life. I want to be out of the hospital. I want more time to myself, because being in the hospital, frankly, is not that enjoyable of a job anymore. And you see it on the reverse end when people, you have this burnout crisis where older physicians are retiring, saying rather than me, clicking boxes all day, I'm looking for the quickest exit I can. And that's why we're getting this doctor shortage, because again, we stopped rewarding the 3 A's and now we reward the RVU box.
I think it has to. I think it has to partly to do with. I think it partly has something to do with how we, the reimbursement of physicians. Like in terms of tying. Once we tied physician income to the federal government, there was no way you're going to keep up with inflation. All right, it wasn't going to happen. So I think what's happened is that you've steadily, relative to other top 10% academic type overachievers, right? I think we've slipped a lot in the last 50 years. And so that's partly because of physician employment and whatnot. But that, if you become a general physician or a primary care physician, right, the extra amount that you have to work now in order to really hit it out of the park is insane, right? And then there's all this massive amount of regulation. Oh, and by the way, whoever will come and audit you to make sure that you're doing X, Y, and Z right.
Or sue you, or, yeah.
Right. So I think that may be the original sin, because I think as long as, why, and then what happens is you have a different group of folks that come in and choose those professions to begin with. So it's kind of like this feedback loop that's really bad that we've kind of got into. But I think in large part, there is a sense of defeatism in many many parts of medicine. And it comprises the folks that make up most of medicine, which is, internal medicine, family practice, pediatrics. There's just a lot of really, I think the morale is terrible. And it's terrible because of all these different things. And that's why you circle back to what we said originally. Like the solution is to break free from these third-party payers, right? There's no one that's happier in the primary care space than the direct primary care folks. The ones who can make it work, of course. It's a little bit of survivor bias. Of course, some people try DPC and it doesn't work.
So I think we got to talk today about a lot of great things, and it's really more, I wouldn't say nebulous, but qualitative, right? Next week, if you don't mind, I'd like to do something more quantitative. I'd like to address some solutions. So I'd love to hear from you, AD, about a couple of Medicaid things, and then I'll have some similar discussions with the rest of the doctors. So if that's cool with you guys, I'd like to do that for next week and then get the listeners ready.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sounds good.
All right, guys. Thank you so much. I really appreciate every one of you. I'm thankful for the conversation.
Likewise. Thanks for all the hard work,
All right,
Dutch.
Thanks, guys.
All right. Bye.